Welcome to our Savvy series. I'm Catherine Magana here with Rachel Ivanovich, where we're here to share with you some mistakes that we see happen with women in retirement, and we want to avoid them. So one of the things that have come up or we see periodically is widowhood. And obviously the loss of a spouse can be very sad, and it's something that you're really caught off guard or you're not really planning for. And there's, different phases. I mean, if you're a young couple or mid, or if you're a little bit older, obviously there's a lot of moving parts and things that you have to consider. And so that is definitely a mistake that we see, that if you don't plan for this, that it could, definitely devastate your retirement plan.
One of the things that we've seen with clients is oftentimes couples will fail to plan for one of the spouses dying and then losing half of the income. For instance, if one of the spouses does have a pension that will go away if one spouse dies.
Well, and then also, so if you're a little bit older, so here you've lived with somebody for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years, and perhaps if your husband handled the finances, you weren't used to handling the finances. And what about the expenses and the budgeting and all, paying the bills? And so there's that financial aspect of, how involved are you, or maybe you don't want to handle it, but at least you're aware.
A lot of people come to me and they say, "Oh no, my husband takes care of that," or "Oh,
or
my
wife
takes care of that." Yeah. And it's really true that every couple that comes in, really, there's one individual that is kind of takes the lead on it. Yeah. And I think it's really important that you know what your numbers are, even if you're not the one who's going to the tax advisor or going to your financial advisor, that you really understand. Like you just said, Catherine, what bills do I pay? And when are they due? What are the passwords for the accounts? Because if all of a sudden it becomes your turn to do the taxes or do the tax planning, you'll feel really lost if you don't understand it at all. So I think it's really important that, maybe go to the next tax appointment, or at least sit down with your spouse or your significant other and, just at least go through it and understand, what bills do we pay? Where are the passwords? And where do you keep... where do you keep past records so that you can actually, have a firm grip on your finances?
Well, and then it's sometimes, obviously this happens sudden, so you don't plan or think about it, and everyone's different. And we've had some women that have lost a spouse, and all of a sudden they're very, task-oriented, like, what do I need to do? What are the next steps? Obviously you need to change beneficiary forms and update accounts. But then there's some that are, they're still grieving. They need a little more time and that space. And so you kind of have to look at, okay, where are they at? What are their needs? I know personally, I'm more task-oriented. When I had a family member pass away, I'm more like, okay, what has to be done? That just kind of helps me through the process. But, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone's different in how they process and do things. But there are definitely some things that you want to look at. We just helped a woman that was recently widowed, and her accounts had her husband as a beneficiary still. And so we went and we're helping her navigate through that. And those are some big decisions she has to make now. Okay, who am I going to put as the beneficiary?
And it's really hard for you oftentimes when you're in the middle of it and you're grieving to be able to take charge. So I think often for a lot of my clients, I think that it may make sense, why don't you involve a family member or an adult child in your life that can come alongside you, and you can plan together for the future, because it's really hard to make decisions when you're grieving.
Well, it's interesting. We got introduced to a woman who her husband recently passed, and a neighbor couple was helping her. And they had their biases and views about certain things and investments. And we didn't end up working together, but it was just one of those things, some of the things that she was being told, it wasn't the best thing for her, but she was, I think, in that moment of really needing guidance and felt comfortable with the neighbor because she knew them, but they didn't have the background with the taxes and the planning, and there's a lot of big decisions that need to be made on different, and also, I think they were looking at, did she want to gift her house, her second home, to her kids, and all these big decisions that there's tax consequences, and so once again, it's being mindful of where somebody's at in the process, but also where are you getting your advice from, and that's something you have to consider too.
I've had several clients this past year whose husbands passed away, and I mean, thankfully they came to me. They were not the ones in charge of the taxes, let's just call it, because typically one spouse takes kind of charge of the taxes and the tax appointment. But I was really grateful that they had come in as a couple together, and we had at least gone over the return the year before, so I'd gotten to know the spouse. So I think it's really important to plan ahead, but to think of the tax consequences as well, because there's significant assets that maybe you've held your home for years and years, and in the year that your spouse passes away, you'll still be filing a joint return. So those are certain considerations. If your spouse does pass away, meet with your tax advisor right away, so that we can help you plan and make decisions right away for the best tax impact.
So as we're talking about what are some action steps, obviously we want to avoid these types of things. Obviously, you don't want to be a widow, but if it does happen, I think, doing financial planning and retirement planning, you can do some of this planning in advance together and with a loved one, even though these are very, very tough conversations. But these are some things you should have the conversations about. If what happens and how are you protected? Do you have life insurance, or do you have enough income coming in? Like you mentioned, there's pensions and different income sources, and is there enough if one of the spouses is no longer there?
That's such a great point, Catherine. I had a client when I was first starting out in my business, so I was in my early 30s, and I went to her house. She had just lost her husband. She was probably in her late 30s, and I was so grateful for her that they had planned ahead, and she was living in this gorgeous house in Del Mar, and I was thinking, how on earth can she afford it? But then she explained to me that they had planned ahead and gotten a life insurance policy in place because I had 2 young children, and I just thought, wow, that saved her. That saved her and the children. And of course, as a single mom at that point, I went out and got a life insurance policy. So I think really thinking about it, you don't want to have that conversation with your spouse, but it can really change the future for a loved one.
What's interesting, we recently met with a woman that shared with us that her husband had passed away a few years ago, and she has young kids, and he left her some life insurance. But it's not just the money aspect, it's also the relationship. I mean, she's now spending a lot of time with the kids on the summer break and traveling, and that's part of her plan, is to really be there for them. And so obviously you have to factor the financial aspect, but also the kind of social and the relationship aspect too has to be
Well, the fact that they had the life insurance now enables her to be able to spend that time.
And so as we're kind of talking about this, one of the things, last year we went on a trip down to Mexico for the weekend, and before we left, I was looking at I pulled my trust because I was like, okay, just want to make sure everything's in order. I mean, not that anything happened.
Every time you go on a trip,
I was like, oh, wait a minute, let's just make sure. But and I called my sister. I called some of the people that were in there. I was like,
just in case,
just so
this is where it is.
I know. And so once again, just making sure your estate's in order, your financial plan. And once again, these are definitely tough conversations. But we've also seen the other side where, a young couple that they didn't have the insurance and things in place, and the wife is, having to figure things out, and it's hard. I mean, it's to have one income going from 2 to 1, and all those big changes. And
being a single parent too. I mean, that just in itself is stressful. If you don't have the money, it's just a double whammy.
So it's it's expensive, and kids, if there's any education planning or it's like all these things that come up. So I think the end result is, definitely look at your financial plan. Doesn't matter what age you are, and we know that these are tough conversations, but that's what we're here, is to make sure that we're not, we don't have this blind spot in your financial plan and retirement plan. All right, so that concludes our Savvy series, and until next time, savvy up. Please stay tuned for important regulatory disclosures.
Savvy Women Wealth Management is an SEC registered investment advisor. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry and how we may be able to assist. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Tax considerations presented may not be appropriate for every individual circumstance. A tax professional should be consulted before making any decisions about your tax liability.